What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast with me, Chris Rickenbaugh, and this is episode 161. So if you've never listened to this podcast before, I am documenting my journey in real estate and business and also talking a little bit about travel hacking and personal finance. And you can find me everywhere on social media, on TikTok and Instagram at chris.rickenbaugh. So that's chris.REICHENBACH. And today's episode is going to be covering why I am turning my primary home into a medium-term rental and how I'm going to do that. So make sure you stay into the episode because I'm going to be going through what is a medium-term rental, why it works in my market, and then some of the numbers that support it. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, thank you for tuning in. And it's also available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Podbean, and Amazon. So make sure you keep listening, and those are some of your options. So let's jump into the meat of today's episode. So turning my home into a medium-term rental. So this was actually the goal whenever I was researching real estate. So I graduated in May of 2022, and then at the beginning of the 2022, I started reading about real estate, and I didn't really think of flipping yet, and I kept thinking of, okay, well, I need to get rentals, I need cash flow, and Airbnb seems a little bit too much, and a long-term rental isn't going to cash flow me enough to where a medium-term rental is right in that sweet spot. So breaking down, figuring out okay, well, what would work as a great medium-term rental, because I can't buy this great big house. I don't have the income for that. And then it's going to cost a lot to furnish. It's going to be a lot of time and effort. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the right goal. So when I saw medium-term rentals, I read the book on it and then kind of hit the ground running from there on what I was exactly looking for. So let's break down what is a medium-term rental first. And a medium-term rental is exactly what it sounds like. So there are long-term rentals that's basically 9 months to a year up. And then a short-term rental is pretty much under 30 days. So medium-term rentals hit this sweet spot of, one to 3 months. That's a medium-term rentals. And I think you could classify it as long-term rental as 6 months and up. But a medium-term rental is sitting right in that sweet spot between the 1 month and the 9 months. And it's furnished. So it's not a move all your stuff in, completely blank apartment. This could be a house, an apartment, a condo, or anything that's rented out for this long or between that time period, and it's it's furnished. So it's basically an Airbnb that's just rented out for a little bit longer. That's probably the 5-year-old version of exactly what it is. But here's why it works. Because, so say, let's just use my house for an example. So it's a little 2-bed, 1-bath, and it's probably going to rent out long-term for maybe $1,500 a month, which isn't too terrible for a small home like this. But a Airbnb is going to be a little bit more difficult because, what we're seeing in the numbers here is that you're needing a little bit of a bigger home for Airbnb stays. Now, it's not impossible, but the numbers just weren't looking that great because you're going off the nightly rate. So when you turn it into a medium-term rental and say, okay, well, what would it look like if this was rented out for a month instead of just a week, instead of a week or two, because then you're trying to schedule everybody in between these little gaps. To where a medium-term rental, you're blocking off months. And it's a little bit easier from what I was reading to be able to get them scheduled, get people in, and then you're able to extend them a little bit more. So that's why it seemed to work in this area a little bit more, because I wasn't sure exactly how much demand there was going to be. So there is quite a bit of demand, but once you go out to the monthly periods, that's where you see on the Airbnb stays, people are having to jump and, stay a week here and then a week at another place. So that's how it's showing me that there's some demand still in this area, and it could work as an Airbnb too. And I just don't have to do that, daily to weekly scheduling to where it's blocked off for an entire month. So for my little house, the biggest thing that I'm going to be needing is professional pictures. So redoing the landscaping, keeping the yard nice, putting in a concrete driveway is going to do quite a bit, along with having a fireplace in the backyard to be able to, go and cook out. It looks like a nice picture. There's a new fence in. So it's a pretty attractive little home to be able to stay in for a month long or two. But the real reason of why I wanted a medium-term rental is that there's a rather big hospital nearby, and it's a certain level to where they bring in travel nurses. So during COVID, travel nurses were this huge thing, and that's what everybody was talking about. Medium-term rentals, travel nurses, that's exactly where it needs to go, because you can also do that on Furnish Finder. And talking to some different travel nurses in this area, they said, oh yeah, we have a lot come in. This is where they tell us to look. So it's there's still a pretty hot demand in this little market, and being able to have the house in the size that I have, I'm like, this is going to fit perfectly. So how this changes on the numbers, and I'm going a little quick here, but it's pretty simple. It's not going to work as a long-term rental. It's not going to be, as productive as an Airbnb, but if I could get this thing to rent for a month-long stay, that's what's going to be really killer, especially if it's on Furnish Finder and on Airbnb, because it turns a long-term rental $1,500 a month into a month-long furnished rental of $2,500 a month, which puts me into cash flow positive. Because for an Airbnb, say, I may be able to get a little bit more, between $2,500 to $3,000. But what happens in there, if you have multiple stays, you're going to have cleaning fees, and then you're going to have utilities stack up on top of it, because there's going to be a lot of people coming into the house. You're going to do your operational expenses such as utilities, water, and you have that as a medium-term rental too, except it's just going to be a little bit different. So that's why it works so well to be able to turn my little home into a medium-term rental, and it's mainly just in this market. So if I can find something smaller, it's clean, right around the hospital as well, I would be doing the exact same thing. I probably wouldn't oversaturate it to where I have 10 of them in this area. And that's where you can get more into the Airbnbs, where you get into the insurance companies. I talked to a guy just yesterday about the insurance companies, and he said it's really only working if you have a lot of them in the area. So this wouldn't quite work since I only have one, but it's still out there on the table. But that is why I'm turning my primary home into a medium-term rental here very, very soon. So make sure you stay tuned to my Instagram and TikTok, where I'm going to be documenting the entire thing. So that's where you're going to be able to keep up with me on that, what I'm doing, how I'm furnishing it, and the process. And you'll be able to basically hear the results on this podcast. So make sure you keep tuning in. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channels on YouTube, and give me a rating and review, and even sending questions so I can get them answered. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Leadway Wealth Builders podcast with me, Chris Rickenbaugh, and I'll see you on the next one.